A single Russian officer stands in the middle of an open wheat field, one arm raised, the other gesturing forward, mouth open in a shout no one will hear above the engines. He is calling his men back into line. The drone overhead has already chosen him. At the corner of the operator's screen, a small triangle of cloud parts and the late morning light catches the shoulder boards for half a second. The crosshair locks. He has no idea his 10-minute window closed 8 minutes ago. The date is mid-May, and the location is a stretch of farmland east of the Kharkiv regional boundary, the kind of country that looks empty from the air and hides everything important inside its tree lines. Ukrainian state border guard units operate this sector. They do not maintain forward observation posts in the conventional sense. Their forward positions are quadcopters at 80 meters, threaded between the cloud base and the canopy, watching a corridor that Russia has tried to push through 4 times since spring. The unit at the center of this video is a border guard FPV cell, a 2-operator team working under the General Staff's Unmanned Systems Directorate, with reconnaissance feed from a separate drone team operating 2 kilometers to the rear. The cell is small, 2 pilots, 1 electronic warfare technician, 1 driver, 1 coordinator running the kill chain. The whole element fits inside a single farm building, with the antennas raised through the attic ventilation hatch, and the ground control stations laid out on what used to be a kitchen table. The Russian objective, as later reconstructed from intercepted radio traffic on Russian assault nets, was a forward shelter belt, a strip of trees no more than 400 meters long, sitting between 2 contested wheat fields. Holding that belt would have given Russian infantry a launch point 1 kilometer closer to Ukrainian positions. The plan was simple: 2 storm groups, light vehicles, fast movement under cloud cover, 10 minutes from line of departure to objective. Then dig in and hold while a second echelon came forward at last light. The commander who briefed the storm groups appears to have believed 3 things. He believed the weather was on his side. He believed Ukrainian drone optics would be degraded by the low ceiling. He believed his window was 10 minutes long. 2 of those 3 beliefs were wrong. The third one would prove fatal. The Kharkiv axis in May had been the focus of renewed Russian probing operations for several weeks. Open-source intelligence channels tracking force movements had logged the rotation of fresh infantry battalions into the rear staging areas behind the contact zone, and the corresponding logistic signatures, fuel deliveries, ammunition lifts, repair vehicle convoys, pointed to small unit assault operations rather than a renewed mechanized push. Russian millblogger commentary in the same period oscillated between confidence and frustration, depending on which subsector the writers were focused on. The subsector covered in this video belonged to the frustrated category. 4 previous attempts on the same corridor had ended without seizing the objective. The 5th attempt, the one this video reconstructs, was supposed to be the one that worked. Reconnaissance is the part of the FPV business that the camera does not show. Ukrainian operators across this front have learned by attrition and by repetition that the difference between a wasted drone and a destroyed vehicle is measured in days of patient observation. The cell at the center of this engagement had been watching the same corridor for 9 days. They had logged Russian movements at dawn and dusk. They had mapped the approach routes the buggies would later take. They had counted on 3 separate occasions the number of dismounts that came up to the shelter belt and the number that went back. They had built a baseline, and they had waited for an anomaly. The anomaly arrived 2 days before the strike, in the form of fresh tire tracks running south-southwest off a tree line 4 kilometers behind the contact zone. Geolocated against earlier imagery shared on open-source intelligence channels, the tracks did not match any of the patrol patterns the cell had logged. The same satellite frames showed increased thermal activity in the same wooded patch. Russian millblogger posts in the same 48 hours hinted vaguely at shaping operations on the Kharkiv axis. The pieces matched. Something was assembling. The Ukrainian coordinator made one decision that would define the next morning. He held the cell's primary fixed-wing reconnaissance drone in reserve and pushed forward 2 cheaper quadcopters as overwatch, 1 high, 1 low. The high one would track the approach. The low one would feed the strike team a clean attack vector once the Russian column committed. Both birds would be invisible to the storm groups, masked by the same cloud base the Russian commander believed was working for him. The cloud ceiling on the morning of the assault sat at roughly 400 meters and refused to lift. From the ground looking up, it was the kind of sky that hides everything. From the air looking down, it changed nothing. Modern FPV optics and the thermal channel on the reconnaissance feed cared very little about a thin overcast. The Russian column would push out of its hide at the moment the cloud felt thickest. That moment was 0914 local time. The first quadcopter Overwatch logged the lead buggy at 0915. A Russian assault buggy is not a buggy in the recreational sense. The vehicles in use across this sector are typically modified Chinese import side-by-sides, stripped down to the frame, sometimes fitted with a single PKM mount on the roll bar. Designed to move 4 to 6 men across open ground at 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. They are cheap, they are loud, they are not armored. Russian doctrine in 2025 leans on these vehicles because tanks and armored carriers no longer survive the approach. The buggy is a confession. The heavy stuff cannot come forward, so the light stuff goes instead, and the men inside it accept the math. 2 buggies came forward at 0915. Behind them, at roughly 400 meters trail, came a third vehicle, a small all-terrain truck with the command element, including the officer who would become the final frame of this video. Behind the command vehicle on foot came 8 dismounts spread in a loose wedge. Total Russian force at the line of departure. Approximately 17 men, 3 vehicles, no organic air defense, no electronic warfare bubble that the border guard cell's reconnaissance had been able to detect. The Ukrainian coordinator did not strike at 0915. He let the column come. He let it cross the first 300 meters of open ground. He let the lead buggy reach the midpoint between the Russian start line and the shelter belt. The point of no return, the point at which retreating would take longer than advancing. At that point, with the column committed and the dismounts in the open, he called the first FPV airborne. The first bird in the air was the trail-end disruption shot. Not the lead vehicle, but the trailing buggy. This is the part of FPV doctrine that Russian commanders on the Kharkiv axis have not yet learned to expect. The standard intuition is that drone strikes go for the front of the column to halt forward motion. Ukrainian operators in this sector now strike the rear of the column first. Because a column that cannot retreat is a column that has to keep moving forward into the kill zone. The lead bird crossed the tree line at 60 meters altitude, descended through the gap between 2 stands of poplar, and lined up on the trailing buggy from behind and slightly above. The pilot held the approach for 4 seconds longer than he needed to, because at 400 meters the optical guidance was clean and the wind was not a factor, and there was no reason to waste the angle. At the last second, the buggy driver looked up, or perhaps looked back. The angle on the recovered footage does not make it clear which. He did not survive what came next. The trailing buggy went up in a flat orange burst, the kind that suggests the cargo space had been packed with extra fuel and small arms ammunition for the assault. 2 men were thrown clear, neither got up. The buggy itself rolled once and came to rest on its side, burning. The column ahead of it now had a problem the Russian commander had not planned for. The route home was on fire. Behind the smoke, the second buggy began to accelerate. Its driver had made a decision, or his commander had made it for him over the platoon net, to push through to the shelter belt rather than turn back. The intercepted radio traffic from this moment, fragments of which were later released by the border guard, captured a single Russian voice repeating the call sign of the trailing vehicle and getting only static in reply. The dismounts on foot, halfway between the start line and the burning buggy, stopped moving. They went prone in the wheat. They were now, in the precise tactical sense, pinned in the open. The Ukrainian coordinator had been here before. Not in this exact field, not against this exact column, but in this exact tactical geometry, a Russian assault element committed, partially broken. Half of it pinned in the open, half of it still trying to reach the objective. The doctrine the border guard cell had developed over the previous months treated this moment as the point at which the engagement was already decided, but not yet finished. The lead buggy had perhaps 90 seconds before it reached the shelter belt. The dismounts had no way out. The command vehicle, 400 meters behind, was still trying to understand what had happened to the trailing buggy. The reserve drone with the thermobaric warhead was still on its pad, untouched, waiting for the kill chain to call it forward. The coordinator did not call it yet. He called the second FPV. The second FPV, the one tasked with the dismounts, was a low-cost quadcopter built around a 7-inch frame. Carrying a fragmentation warhead, in the 1.5 kilogram class. Unit cost, somewhere between $600 and $1,000 depending on what components were on the bench the week it was assembled. The bird crossed the same tree line as the first one, dropped to 15 meters altitude, and began a slow lateral sweep across the wheat field at the speed of a fast jog. Russian dismounts pinned in open wheat have very few options. The wheat in this region in May stands at roughly 40 to 50 centimeters. Too short to truly hide a man, too tall for a man to crawl quickly through. The 8 dismounts had gone prone in a rough wedge, the formation they had been moving in when the trailing buggy went up. The second FPV pilot did not strike the wedge as a single target. He worked it the way an experienced operator works a beehive. One approach, one detonation, one withdrawal, a brief lateral repositioning, a second approach on the next concentration. The footage released by the unit shows the wedge breaking apart within the first 60 seconds of the second drone's run. Men stood, men ran, men did not get far. Inside the border guard cell's farmhouse, the lead pilot did not speak during the first 60 seconds. The coordinator did not speak. The electronic warfare technician kept his eyes on the spectrum analyzer, watching for any Russian jamming attempt that did not come. The only sound, on the recovered audio from the cell's internal recorder, is the hum of the cooling fans on the ground control stations, and twice, the click of the lead pilot's tongue against his teeth as he adjusted approach geometry. By 0918, 3 minutes after the lead buggy crossed into the kill zone, the engagement had already collapsed Russian assault posture. The trailing buggy was burning. The dismount wedge was broken. The lead buggy was still moving, but it was now alone in the open, with no infantry support behind it and no reinforcement coming forward. The Russian commander in the all-terrain truck 400 meters back appears to have realized at this moment that he was no longer commanding an assault. He was commanding a withdrawal under contact, and he was the senior officer left alive on the field. What he did next is the part of this engagement that the cell will replay in training videos for the next year. He got out of the vehicle. He got out of the vehicle on open ground, with no cover within sprinting distance, and he walked forward toward his men. The recovered footage from the high Overwatch quadcopter shows him clearly, a stocky figure in a clean uniform. No helmet visible. One hand raised in the gesture every army on Earth uses to mean rally on me. Push forward, hold the line. He was perhaps trying to reorganize the surviving dismounts. He was perhaps trying to push the lead buggy's crew toward the shelter belt. The intercepted radio traffic from this moment includes a single transmission in his voice, 3 words, 2 of them call signs, 1 of them an instruction, and then nothing. The third FPV was already in the air. The fourth was being armed. The lead buggy reached the shelter belt at 0919. Its 3 occupants dismounted at a run, weapons up, looking for cover that was not there. The third FPV pilot, who had crossed the tree line moments earlier with the wedge survivors in his sights, swung north and took the lead buggy crew before they reached the trees. The buggy, now empty, sat in the open at the edge of the tree line for the next several minutes. A piece of evidence, intact and burning gently from a secondary fire, that the assault had reached its objective and could not hold it. The remaining wedge survivors became the second FPV's problem for another full minute. They did not last it. The reserve drone, the one held back from the first wave, was a single-use fixed-wing platform carrying a thermobaric warhead in the 3-kilogram class. Thermobaric warheads work by dispersing a fuel-air mixture across an area and igniting it, producing a shockwave that propagates through open terrain in a way that conventional fragmentation does not. They are not subtle. They are not surgical. They are the answer to the specific problem of a target standing in the open with no cover, surrounded by his own men, at a range where you want one strike to settle the question. The thermobaric bird left its pad at 0921. Flight time to target under 2 minutes. The Russian officer in those 2 minutes did not move from where he was standing. The high Overwatch quadcopter holds him in frame for the entire approach. He gestures twice more. He looks south toward the burning trailing buggy. He looks north toward the shelter belt where his lead element has just been wiped out. He puts a hand to his ear, listening for a transmission on the platoon net. The transmission does not come. The thermobaric strike arrived from the officer's 8 o'clock low and fast, and the footage cuts to white for 2 full seconds before the dust clears. When the dust clears, the officer is no longer in the frame. The all-terrain truck 400 meters behind him is on fire. The wheat field between the truck and the shelter belt is on fire. Two of the remaining dismounts who had been crawling back toward the start line are no longer moving. The engagement, from the first FPV crossing the tree line to this single white flash, has taken 6 minutes and 41 seconds. The border guard cell did not stand down at 0922. They worked the field for another 40 minutes, sending 2 additional reconnaissance quadcopters across the engagement zone to confirm there were no Russian survivors moving back toward their own lines and no follow-on element coming forward. Combat footage released by the unit shows 7 distinct smoking points across roughly 400 meters of farmland. The trailing buggy, the lead buggy, the all-terrain command truck, the cluster where the wedge of dismounts had been pinned, the spot where the 3 lead buggy crew had taken final cover, the impact crater from the thermobaric strike, and a small secondary fire in the shelter belt itself where the lead buggy had touched off dry undergrowth. No Ukrainian casualties. A 0. The cell's 2 pilots, the electronic warfare technician, the driver, and the coordinator were all still inside the farmhouse, with the antennas still raised through the attic hatch, drinking instant coffee and reviewing the playback when the General Staff's morning report was filed. The recovered Russian radio, found by a Ukrainian reconnaissance team that swept the engagement zone after dark, was still operational. It had been clipped to the webbing of one of the dismounts and had survived the wedge strike intact. For the next several hours, it continued to receive transmissions from the Russian battalion net, call signs requesting status updates, a higher headquarters asking why the storm group had not radioed in, a frustrated voice repeating an order to send a runner forward. None of the call signs received a reply. The radio was eventually switched off and brought back across the line of contact as evidence. In dollar terms, the engagement was unbalanced in a way that has become familiar across the Kharkiv axis. The Ukrainian side expended 4 FPV drones at a combined hardware cost in the 4-figure range, somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000, depending on the configurations used and on whether the thermobaric reserve is counted at production cost or at the higher figure that includes the warhead components. The Russian side lost 3 vehicles: the radio, the personal weapons of 17 men, and the men themselves. The buggies and the truck are replaceable. The trained assault infantry, in the current Russian manpower picture, are not. The signing bonus cost alone of 17 contracted soldiers committed to this assault would have been in the range of $300,000 to $400,000, before salary, before equipment, before the political cost of 17 notifications going out to 17 Russian regions in the same week. Every man in those buggies and on foot behind them had signed a contract. Every man had chosen the bonus. Every man had been told the assault was 10 minutes long. The doctrinal implication is the part that makes Russian planners nervous. A border guard cell, not a frontline mechanized brigade, not an elite drone regiment, but a 5-person element from an organization whose primary peacetime mission is patrolling national frontiers, was able to absorb and destroy a battalion-level assault attempt with off-the-shelf consumer-grade airframes and a single specialty warhead. The cell did not need to request fires from higher. The cell did not need to coordinate with adjacent units. The cell did not need to break radio silence on any net the Russian side could intercept. The reconnaissance, the targeting, the strike decision, and the battle damage assessment all ran inside one farmhouse, on one shared local network in real time. Remember the third belief the Russian commander appears to have held, that his window was 10 minutes long. The first FPV crossed the tree line 3 minutes into that window. The thermobaric strike landed at 6 minutes and 41 seconds. The commander's own window closed inside his own timeline. Another armored push absorbed. Another shelter belt that Russia does not own. Another 400 meters of Ukrainian wheat field where the line today did not move. But the more important number from this engagement is not the dollar figure and not the casualty count. It is the time. 6 minutes and 41 seconds. From the first FPV crossing the tree line to the thermobaric impact. That is the reaction loop the border guard cell can now run repeatedly against any Russian assault that commits to the open ground in this sector. It is shorter than the time it takes for Russian artillery to register a counter-battery target. It is shorter than the time it takes for a Russian command element to confirm contact and authorize a retreat. It is shorter, in many cases, than the time it takes for the storm group's higher headquarters to realize the assault has even begun. That reaction loop is what the broader Russian command structure on the Kharkiv axis has not yet found an answer to. Layered FPV teams with reconnaissance overwatch, with a coordinator running the kill chain, with a held reserve for the command element, do not require a single piece of artillery. They do not require a brigade. They require 5 people in a farmhouse with antennas raised through the attic. The shift in the cost curve is the part Russian planners now have to absorb, and they have not absorbed it. The assault that opened this video was the 5th attempt on this corridor since spring. None of them have reached the shelter belt and held. Open-source intelligence channels reading the same week's combat footage have begun describing the new Ukrainian tactic in terms of chaos. A deliberate compression of the Russian decision cycle, an engagement geometry in which the storm group never gets to the point of fighting back because there is nothing left of the storm group by then. At ground level, that chaos looks like this: a wheat field, 7 smoking points, a radio still squawking call signs to men who will not answer. The officer who stepped out of the all-terrain truck and raised his arm to rally his men chose to cross a border that was not his to cross. The border held the line.